I've always thought of the suburbs as a kind of architectural witness protection program. We're all here, hidden from the chaos of the city, trying our best to blend in with identical beige siding and perfectly sculpted boxwoods. You move in, you sign the HOA agreement, and you agree to the unwritten covenant, "Thou shalt not draw attention to thyself." I knew the rules. I bought the beige house. I even bought the boxwoods. But here's the thing about me. I have a soul, and that soul occasionally demands a splash of color, a tiny moment of personal defiance against the tyranny of taupe. Enter. The rug. I found it on sale, which should have been my first warning. It wasn't offensive, not really. It was an outdoor rug, a sturdy, mildew-resistant thing, 7 feet by 10 feet, designed for my covered front porch. It had a geometric pattern, sort of a retro-modern mashup of triangles and chevrons. The colors were assertive. Think charcoal, cream, and a specific shade of teal that the manufacturer optimistically called lagoon blue. I called it slightly aggressive mouthwash. I remember rolling it out that Saturday morning. The porch was just plain, gray concrete. Boring. I unfurled the rug, kicked off my flip-flops, and admired the transformation. Instant personality. Instant pop. I took a step back, sipping my coffee, feeling like a domestic god of minor home improvement. I swear, the moment that polyester hit the concrete, she felt it. It was like a disturbance in the suburban force. I hadn't even finished setting my coffee mug down when I saw her. Karen. You know Karen. Everyone in every HOA knows a Karen. She's the one whose hedge is always exactly 3 inches shorter than everyone else's, whose garden gnomes are all wearing tiny, regulation-compliant scarves. She doesn't walk, she patrols. And she was patrolling my sidewalk, heading directly toward my porch like a cruise missile locked onto a teal target. "Good morning, Alex," she chirped. It wasn't a question. It was a verbal opening of a case file. "Morning, Karen," I replied, trying to sound breezy. I gestured grandly at my porch. "Check it out. Instant curb appeal, right?" Karen stopped at the bottom of the steps. She didn't look at the rug. She looked past the rug, at some distant, idealized vision of a porch that was clearly just a shade of beige darker than the house. "It is certainly present," she said, nodding slowly. She had a clipboard, naturally. The clipboard was her scepter of petty authority. "Alex, I was just reviewing the updated Homeowners Association exterior decoration guidelines, specifically Section 4.B2, the section concerning transient exterior ornamentation." I took a deep, fortifying breath. "Transient? Karen, it's a rug. I could roll it up right now." "That is precisely the issue," she countered, tapping her pen against the laminate surface of her clipboard. "The pattern and the color, particularly that lagoon, deviate significantly from the established aesthetic cohesion standards for the Meadowbrook Village community." I blinked. "Aesthetic cohesion? Karen, Frank next door has a 6-foot inflatable flamingo wearing a Santa hat in July. I have a geometric rectangle." "Frank's flamingo is seasonal decor," she stated, without blinking. "It is temporary. Yours, however, draws the eye in a way that suggests a permanent challenge to the agreed-upon standards of our neighborhood's visual palette. It's aggressive. Aggressive." My poor, slightly teal rug was apparently an act of aesthetic terrorism. I tried to reason with her. I really did. I argued that the bylaws, which I had actually read once, said nothing about the color of a movable rug. They talked about paint, they talked about fencing, and they talked about mandatory pressure washing schedules. Nothing on transient floor coverings. But Karen wasn't interested in legality. She was interested in control. We rely on the spirit of the document, Alex. And the spirit of the document is beige. It is tasteful. It is uniform. I strongly suggest you reconsider the placement of this item before I have to draft a formal violation notice. She executed a perfect, crisp about-face and marched back across the lawn. Her retreat was tactical, not total. She knew she had won the initial skirmish. And she was right. I was tired. It was 10 a.m. I didn't want the hassle. Grumbling, I rolled up the offending lagoon blue rug and dragged it into the garage, where it could aggressively exist in peace. I thought that would be the end of it. I thought Karen would chalk up a small, meaningless victory on her clipboard and move on to policing the height of someone else's grass blades. I was wrong. That afternoon, I was still stewing. I was on the sofa, scrolling through design sites, venting via text to my friend Leo. Me. She called the rug aggressive. The rug, Leo. It's a woven square. Leo. Dude, just get a brown one. It's not worth the war. Me. It is worth the war. It's the principle. It's like she thinks she gets to regulate my ocular input the moment I step onto my own property. That's when I saw it. The image that changed everything. It wasn't a rug. It was a photograph of a porch in Lisbon, Portugal, completely covered in mosaic tiles. Not subtle, rustic tiles. We're talking brilliant, hand-cut, highly reflective glass tiles forming an impossible hypnotic pattern. Yellows that hurt your eyes, blues that were practically ultraviolet, reds that screamed. It was visually loud, it was gorgeous, and it was permanent. A cold, beautiful clarity washed over me. Karen had complained about a removable piece of fabric. She had established the precedent that she cared intensely about the aesthetics of my porch floor. Well, if she wanted a permanent challenge to the aesthetic cohesion, I was going to give her one that was structurally integrated, foundationally sound, and visible from Google Earth, through my phone onto the sofa. I had a mission. I didn't want a rug anymore. I wanted a permanent, magnificent, blindingly bright, tessellated monument to spite. I walked out to the garage and looked at the rolled-up lagoon blue rug. You served your purpose, buddy, I whispered. But a rug is transient. A foundation, properly executed in iridescent glass, is forever. That night, I didn't sleep. I was drawing. I was sketching aggressive sunbursts and angular chevrons. I was on a specific, vindictive search. I needed a contractor who was not only highly skilled, but also clearly understood the spiritual component of this project. I needed an artist who specialized in, I dare you to complain about this permanent structural art. The war had been declared, and I was going to win by making my porch look like a retired cruise ship casino. The next day, I started making phone calls. I was meticulous. Karen wanted standards. I would deliver a permanent standard of pure, unadulterated aesthetic chaos, and I couldn't wait to see her face when the jackhammers started. This wasn't just about a rug anymore. This was about the soul of the suburbs. And my soul was apparently rendered in iridescent safety vest orange. My vision quickly solidified into something genuinely terrifying. I called it the sunrise of spite. The design wasn't just colors. It was a full geometric meltdown. The center featured a huge, abstract sunburst, all blinding yellow and orange, with rays shooting out to the edges of the porch. The surrounding area would be a frenetic mix of lagoon blue, a nod to the fallen rug, a high-gloss magenta, and black grout. The key element, every single piece, had to be reflective glass tile. My porch needed to act like a giant stationary disco ball every time the sun hit it. I needed professionals. But finding someone who could execute fine craftsmanship and embrace the spirit of pure, petty architectural absurdity proved difficult. I started with contractor interview 1, the traditionalist. His name was Mr. Harrison. He looked exactly like the kind of man who has earned the right to suggest beige. He wore pristine khaki shorts, a crisp polo shirt, and looked at my drawings with the quiet horror of a museum curator viewing graffiti. "Mr. Harrison," I began, spreading the enormous, colorful schematic across my dining room table. "I need this executed in glass mosaic, every tile." He adjusted his glasses. "Well, Alex, I see. Quite a bit of color here." "Yes, sir. It's supposed to be vibrant. The central sunburst is Vegas gold and nuclear orange." He ran a weary hand over his chin. "You know, we specialize in high-end exterior surface work. I've done a lot of beautiful flagstone, some incredible travertine. We just finished a beautiful subdued slate patio over on Arbor Lane. Matched the earth tones perfectly." "I don't want earth tones, Mr. Harrison. I want aesthetic warfare. I want this to look like the sun threw up a rainbow onto my porch. Do you see the magenta chevrons around the border?" "I do, Alex, I do. And that is where I have to express some concern regarding property cohesion." He used Karen's exact language. It was like they had a shared suburban lexicon. "Are you sure you wouldn't prefer perhaps a nice tumbled stone? Perhaps something in a gray? It would really let the natural beauty of your beautiful beige siding shine." The conversation went on for 45 agonizing minutes, a comedic miscommunication loop. He'd suggest subtle elegance. I'd insist on maximum visual noise. He'd mention resale value. I'd talk about spiritual victory. Finally, Mr. Harrison sighed. "Alex, I admire the boldness, truly, but I think this requires an artist whose vision aligns more closely with maximalism. My team is, regrettably, suddenly fully booked for the next 6 months. Good luck to you." He left behind a brochure full of tastefully monochromatic patios, like a beige monument to what might have been. I was back to square one, but now I knew the secret code. I had to find a contractor who appreciated maximalism. This led me to contractor interview 2, the eccentric. I found him via a cryptic local ad that simply showed a picture of a 6-story mural of a dragon wearing a top hat. His name was Dante Chavez. Dante showed up 2 days later. He had a magnificent, sweeping mustache, tattoos that covered his arms and neck like detailed geological maps, and he wore overalls spattered with every color imaginable. When he stepped onto my porch, he wasn't looking at the concrete. He was looking at the potential. I spread out the sunrise of spite. Dante stared. Not with horror, but with reverence. He didn't say anything for a long minute. "This," he finally announced, running a finger over the line I'd drawn for the magenta tile, "is profoundly, aggressively necessary. I'm in." I nearly cried tears of spiteful joy. "Really? You don't think it's too much?" Dante scoffed. "Too much? My friend, there is no such thing as too much when battling the spiritual void of conformity. This is not tiling. This is a statement." We got down to the technical details. The conversation was exhilarating. Dante was all business, but with a vibrant artistic twist. "Okay, look," he said, gesturing around the porch. We gotta break the original slab, lay down a new sub-base, and use a flexible, high-bond, thin-set mortar. If we want that reflection to last, we need to use a marine-grade sealant. The glass is going to be incredibly durable, but it's going to be a technical bitch to cut, especially these tiny pieces for the sun's rays. Then came the legal chat. You mentioned the HOA, Dante said, pulling out a crumpled, paint-stained notebook. I've dealt with the tyranny of the tasteful before. Your saving grace is that they regulate materials. They talk about approved paint palettes and natural stone pavers. They don't regulate art. This is an installation. So they can't stop me? They can try. They can send C&D letters until the cows come home. But their bylaws are specific. If they don't explicitly forbid permanent, non-commercial mosaic art, they have to change their entire charter to stop you. That takes time, votes, and a level of bureaucratic competence Karen probably doesn't possess. He gave me the quote. The number was astronomical. It was the cost of a slightly used luxury car. Is this negotiable, Dante? Dante stroked his mustache. I'm willing to give you a discount on the grout, but not on the commitment to pure, unadulterated aesthetic chaos. This is not a job, Alex. This is a calling. I didn't hesitate. Done. When can we start the demolition? As soon as the materials arrive. And trust me, ordering these specific colors of high-gloss Venetian glass tiles is going to be an adventure in international logistics. Dante was right. The order was an adventure. I found myself on the phone with a tile distributor in Arizona, a man named Bob, who sounded like he mainly dealt in off-white subway tile. So, let me make sure I have this straight, sir. Bob's voice crackled over the line. You need 500 square feet of 2x2mm glass mosaic tiles. In nuclear orange. That's correct, Bob. And the magenta. And the lagoon blue. And the grout, Bob continued, sounding increasingly like a hostage victim. You want 200 pounds of pitch-black grout mix, plus 50 pounds of iridescent safety vest orange grout. To match the tile? Yes, Bob. The orange grout goes with the orange tile. We need that seamless, overwhelming glow. There was a long silence. Sir, I've sold tile for 20 years. Nobody matches the grout to the tile unless they're tiling a public restroom in a nightmare dimension. Well, Bob, congratulations. You're tiling my nightmare dimension. Are you sure you don't want a nice, neutral gray? It provides contrast. Bob, I said, leaning into the phone, channeling all the spite Karen had given me. Contrast is for cowards. We are going for visual singularity. Just ship the iridescent safety vest orange. I hung up, buzzing. The materials were ordered. Dante was ready. The HOA was blissfully unaware that its foundation was about to be challenged by a tsunami of color. I knew Karen was preparing her next passive-aggressive move, maybe a strongly worded email about my mailbox being half an inch too close to the curb. But she had no idea the actual counteroffensive was scheduled to begin with a jackhammer. The materials arrived on a Tuesday morning. It wasn't a subtle delivery. A tractor trailer the size of a small apartment building squealed to a halt on my narrow suburban street. Boxes upon boxes of shiny, colorful vengeance were unloaded. The stacks of glass tiles shimmered in the morning sun, throwing off blinding flashes of magenta and gold. It was a visual riot. I watched, through the window, sipping coffee. And then there she was, Karen. She was already out, ostensibly walking her yappy little schnauzer, but really she was performing recon. She saw the stacks of materials. She saw Dante, who had arrived wearing a welding helmet and a t-shirt that read, "Aesthetics are temporary. Spite is forever." Her pace slowed. Her eyes narrowed. She didn't have her clipboard, but I could practically see the HOA violation notice generating in her brain. Dante and his crew didn't ease into it. They showed up with a trailer full of heavy equipment. At exactly 8:01 a.m., 1 minute after the official start of legal construction hours, the first jackhammer hit the concrete. K-chunk, K-chunk, chunk, chunk. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of rules breaking. It was the sound of a foundation of conformity shattering under the weight of glorious rebellion. I narrated the entire scene from my picture window like a war correspondent. "The demolition has begun," I whispered dramatically. "The enemy is mobilizing." Sure enough, Karen was already on my lawn, vibrating with fury. She held her phone tightly, presumably dialing the president of the HOA, the local zoning commission, and maybe the UN Security Council. "Alex, stop this immediately!" she shrieked over the roar of the machinery. I opened the front door just enough to shout back. "Can't hear you, Karen. Noise ordinance says we can start at 8. We're compliant. Check the bylaws." She stood there for 10 minutes, her face a mask of silent, sputtering rage, exactly as the outline required. She looked like a cartoon villain whose lair was being renovated without her permission. Then she backed off, retreating to her house to initiate Plan B, the noise complaint. It took about 45 minutes. The noise hadn't even peaked when the local police cruiser, Unit 417, rolled slowly down the street. It was precisely 8:46 a.m. The officer who emerged was named Rodriguez, according to his name tag. He was a solid guy, mid-40s, tired eyes, and the general demeanor of someone who has dealt with exactly one too many noise complaints involving leaf blowers and emotional suburbanites. He walked past Karen, who was now dramatically observing the demolition from behind her perfectly manicured hedge, and approached Dante. "Morning," Officer Rodriguez said, his voice deep and calm against the mechanical clamor. "Got a complaint about excessive noise." Dante, who was currently wrestling a massive piece of broken concrete, merely pointed a grubby finger toward the front window where I was watching. I opened the door and stepped onto the lawn. "Officer, I can save you some time. I'm Alex. The noise is from this fully permitted, legally compliant demolition of my pre-existing porch slab, which is being replaced by a permanent architectural feature." Officer Rodriguez gave me a weary look. "Sir, I just need to verify compliance. Do you have permits? And are you within the legal hours?" I slapped the laminated building permit, which Dante had shrewdly affixed to a signpost, proving I was compliant. 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., officer. We are squeaky clean on noise ordinance." Karen, seeing her moment, emerged from the hedge. "Officer, you need to understand the context here. This is not just noise, it's harassment. This started because of a rug, a hideous teal geometric rug he had on the porch." Officer Rodriguez turned slowly from me to Karen, then back to me. His eyes were doing that thing where law enforcement tries to mentally classify the level of suburban absurdity they are facing. "A rug, ma'am?" he asked. "Yes, a transient exterior ornamentation violation. When he removed it, I assumed the matter was settled, but now he is attempting to destabilize the entire aesthetic integrity of the neighborhood by demolishing his property." Karen was practically vibrating. I stepped forward, putting my hand over my heart, affecting a wounded, dramatic tone. "Officer, she is right about the rug. That rug, officer, was the beginning of my journey toward structural defense. The crime was that the rug dared to exist in a color slightly louder than oatmeal. I removed the rug, but the underlying psychological threat, the idea that my neighbor dictates my floor coverings, remained. This demolition and the subsequent artistic installation is my only recourse against aesthetic tyranny. Officer Rodriguez leaned in close to me, speaking quietly. Sir, I am required to ask, are you having any dispute with your neighbor that would constitute criminal harassment? None at all, officer. I'm just exercising my right to property improvement legally, on schedule, and with a slight degree of artistic flair that Karen finds upsetting. Being upsetting, I checked, is still legal in this state. The officer sighed, running his hand over his close-cropped hair. He looked at the heavy machinery, the scattered bits of concrete, and then at Karen, whose eyes were shooting metaphorical daggers. Ma'am, the noise is within legal limits. He has the proper permits. As long as he stays within the hours, there's nothing the police can do about construction noise, Officer Rodriguez said firmly to Karen. But the intention, officer, look at the colors on that pile of glass. It's an act of war. Officer Rodriguez turned back to me. Sir, I suggest you try to maintain neighborly peace, but legally you're compliant. Have a good day. He climbed back into his cruiser, leaving a visibly defeated Karen standing behind her hedge. I watched him pull away. He didn't use the emergency lights, but he did peel out of the neighborhood slightly faster than necessary. He was escaping. The noise continued all day, a beautiful, maddening symphony. By late afternoon, the old concrete was gone. Dante's crew began prepping the new forms. Dante was ecstatic. We got all the bad juju out of the original slab. Alex, he said, wiping sweat and concrete dust from his face. Now we pour the new sub-base. It's solid. It's final. Once this sets, this porch is yours forever. He wasn't wrong. When the cement mixer truck arrived, another magnificent suburban eyesore, and the gray, wet concrete flowed into the forms, it felt profound. It was the physical manifestation of my spite. It was solid, irreversible, and soon to be topped with enough shimmering glass to blind a deity. As the wet concrete settled, Dante and I shared a brief, mutual, ridiculous smile. He was getting paid a ridiculous amount of money to make art. I was winning a ridiculous feud using industrial construction. It was pure, beautiful American absurdity. The foundation of conformity was officially cracked. Now for the spectacle. The base cured rapidly. The foundation was set. It was time for the true visual assault to begin. Dante and his two lead artists, both quiet young women named Willow and Sky, started the tiling process. This wasn't like tiling a bathroom. This was intricate, careful, agonizing work. But as the small, reflective glass tiles, the nuclear orange, the Vegas gold, the lagoon blue, and the shocking magenta began to cover the surface, the effect was immediate and dizzying. Alex describes the scene, the way the morning sun hit the tiles, causing thousands of tiny, brilliant reflections to dance across the house and the surrounding lawns. The porch was transforming into a disco floor that permanently ran on high beam. It was aggressive. It was spectacular. It was exactly what I wanted. I was out there every day supplying coffee and narrating the work. Willow, the contrast on that cyan line is perfection, I'd say. It really screams, I adhere to no municipal taste standards. Willow, focused on cutting a tiny triangle, would just nod. It's going to be a masterpiece of visual noise, Alex. The entire curb appeal of the street shifted dramatically. People who never spoke to me, people who usually avoided eye contact, started pulling over. Kids would point. The older residents were visibly confused. The neighborhood was divided. Half thought it was brilliant, half thought I was insane, and Karen thought I was a menace. As Section 4B2 of the porch neared completion, I got it. a blistering, certified letter from the HOA, delivered by a bored-looking FedEx guy. The envelope felt thick with righteous indignation. The title was ominous: Notice of Cessation and Demand for Remediation. I sat down and read the 4-page document. It cited gross aesthetic deviation, public nuisance, and my personal favorite, material degradation of neighborhood aesthetic standard. It demanded I cease work immediately and return the porch surface to an approved natural tone paving material within 14 days. I waited an hour, then I called Dante. "The gauntlet has been thrown," I told him. "Good," Dante replied. "What's the exact language they used to prohibit mosaics?" I scanned the document again. They didn't. They talk about pavers, wood deck material, and approved exterior stains. They don't mention mosaics, tessellation, or artistic installation. "Exactly," Dante said smugly. "They wrote their bylaws to control things they could imagine. They never imagined you." I spent the rest of the evening crafting my reply. It was a masterpiece of legalistic sarcasm. I began, "Dear Meadowbrook Village HOA Board, thank you for your thoughtful, if misguided, correspondence." I went on to meticulously quote every section they cited, demonstrating that the term pavers did not apply to custom-cut glass tile, and that the term stain was irrelevant to an inlaid, permanent, architectural art installation. I attached a single page from Dante's company portfolio showing his work on a high-end gallery floor, listing the porch as the Suburban Resistance Series, piece number 1. I signed off with a pretentious quote, fabricated on the spot. "Art is not a mirror held up to reality, but a hammer with which to shape it." I attributed it to a non-existent 19th century mosaicist, Giovanni Spitaforza. I mailed the response certified, return receipt requested. The ball was back in their perpetually beige court. The work didn't stop. Dante and the crew were working furiously, knowing the clock was ticking down to a potential court injunction. Then, on Friday afternoon, during peak reflection hours, Karen played her final card. Unit 419, driven by Officer Davis, a young man who looked like he'd rather be directing traffic at a high school football game, pulled up. He was visibly confused. "Sir?" Officer Davis called out, walking past the dazzling porch. "I received a complaint, a 911 call, actually, stating that your property constitutes a public disturbance and may violate local mural and decency codes." I stepped off the porch, wiping my hands on a cloth. "Officer, I'm Alex, and you are here because my permanent, legally installed porch floor is too bright. Is that correct?" He squinted at the porch, which was currently flaring in a spectacular magenta burst. "It is. Certainly colorful, sir." Karen materialized across the street, holding a pair of binoculars. "I swear to God." "Officer," Karen shouted, "that man is violating the spirit of community. That color is a safety hazard. It's a traffic distraction. It's highly inappropriate." I turned to Officer Davis, my face a picture of feigned sincerity. "Officer, my neighbor is suggesting that my commissioned work, a piece meant to pay homage to the rich cultural heritage of suburban porch tiling, is a crime. Are there laws in this state against subjective aesthetic preference?" Officer Davis pulled out his notebook, looking genuinely pained. "Sir, I have to check the relevant codes for public indecency and sign ordinances. Is there any nudity, profanity, or hate speech incorporated into the tile design?" I walked him over to the edge. "Here's the centerpiece, officer. The sunrise of spite. Abstract. Geometric. No swear words, no nudity. Just pure, clean, reflective glass. It's colorful, yes. It's bold, yes. It is perhaps aggressively tacky. But I checked. Being tacky is not illegal. If it were, half of Vegas would be in lockdown. Officer Davis looked from the mosaic to me to the binoculars-wielding Karen. He rubbed his temples. Sir, legally, this falls under private property improvement. If there's no visible obscenity, traffic hazard, or structural issue, then it's a civil matter for your HOA, he concluded, his voice laced with the weariness of a man who understands that sometimes his job is just babysitting angry adults. I appreciate your dedication to upholding my architectural freedom, officer. As he turned to leave, I couldn't resist. Officer Davis, would you like a small piece of the Vegas gold tile? A souvenir of true freedom? He paused, a tiny smirk fighting its way onto his face. No, sir, but you keep up the good work. He got back in his car. I watched him briefly make eye contact with Karen before driving off, shaking his head. The HOA was definitely preparing for legal action. Dante knew it. I knew it. We had maybe 3 days before a court order could halt the project. We worked through the night, using construction lights that amplified the mosaic's blinding glow. The intense color, the hurried work, the legal tension. It created a visually overwhelming spectacle that drew every rubbernecker in a 5-mile radius. As Dante applied the final section of black grout to frame the colors, the porch went from beautiful chaos to ordered, magnificent chaos. The visual singularity was achieved. We beat the clock. I woke up the next morning feeling like a general after a victorious campaign. The air was cool, the sun was just rising, and the porch was complete. I walked outside, Dante already there, examining the cure. She's glorious, Alex, Dante whispered, running a gloved hand over the surface. The sunrise of spite was perfect. The reflective glass, especially the Vegas gold, shimmered with unbelievable intensity. The black grout provided a necessary visual anchor, making the lagoon blue and nuclear orange pop. When I hit the surface with a hose to clean off the grout haze, the water beaded up, and the colors seemed to intensify, like the porch was screaming its existence to the world. The neighbors were already reacting. A car slowed down, the driver pulling out a phone to take a picture. The entire neighborhood was polarized by my new front porch. People were laughing, pointing, and debating its artistic merit. And then, I saw her. Karen's silent fury. Karen emerged for her morning patrol walk with the schnauzer. She stopped dead center on the sidewalk. Her eyes, usually darting with the intensity of a 1,000-yard supervisor, locked onto the finished porch. She didn't shout, she didn't march, she didn't even drop her jaw. Her face went completely still, a perfect mask of impotent rage. It was the face of someone who has just realized they've been outmaneuvered by an aggressively tacky piece of structural geometry. She simply stood there, stiff as a statue, radiating a silent explosion of purely legalistic hatred. The schnauzer, sensing the tension, peed nervously on her boxwood. She turned and marched her dog back inside without a word. It was the most satisfying silence I had ever experienced. The legal showdown was set for that evening in the musty, air-conditioned basement of the community clubhouse. I wore a suit. Dante wore a very nice, slightly paint-splattered black t-shirt and his magnificent mustache. The HOA board consisted of 4 people, led by Chairman Henderson, a pale, nervous man who looked like he wished he had retired to literally any place that didn't have bylaws. Karen was seated at the table, her clipboard open, her pen poised like a legal weapon. Henderson cleared his throat. "Mr. Alex, thank you for attending this emergency session. We have received your detailed response to our cease and desist, and frankly, the board finds your installation to be an unacceptable, unapproved, and frankly, garish deviation from community standards." "Mr. Henderson, with respect, garish is a subjective term," I began, my voice calm and conversational, but with a slight edge of theatrical sincerity. "As my letter outlined, I have complied with all structural permits, noise ordinances, and most importantly, I have complied with the specific written language of the Meadowbrook Village HOA bylaws." Karen jumped in, her voice sharp. "He's skirting the intent. Section 4. Mandates all exterior surfaces shall utilize natural, non-reflective materials that complement the existing color palette of the residence." "Ah, Section 4A, I said, leaning back. "That section, Karen, applies to paint and siding. My porch is neither painted nor sided. It is a tessellated installation. Furthermore, the existing color palette of my residence includes the roof shingles, which have several shades of gray and black. The grout is black. The blue tiles match the sky's reflection. The gold and orange, well, they complement the sun, which is a natural element." Henderson rubbed his eyes. "Mr. Alex, we are using the common sense clause. This looks like a giant reflective cereal box. It's destroying the integrity of the street." This was Dante's cue. He stood up slowly, stroking his mustache, and spoke with the measured seriousness of a high art critic. "Excuse me, Chairman," Dante said, his voice quiet but commanding. "As the commissioned artist and installation expert, I must object to the characterization. This is not tiling. It is a custom architectural art installation. We used the opus sectile method with modern materials. We filed this project with my portfolio as the Suburban Resistance series. It is a commissioned piece of fine art." Dante then pulled out a binder, thicker than Karen's, full of glossy photos, fabricated legal documentation, and even a completely made-up historical significance of reflective mosaics in 21st century American suburbs document. "Your bylaws regulate construction materials like paint, pavers, and fencing," Dante continued, pointing at the board. "They do not regulate art. To stop this installation, you would have to pass an amendment regulating non-commercial, permanent, abstract, geometric, architectural art installations, defining acceptable color palettes, and then hold a neighborhood-wide vote. By the time you do that, the statute of limitations on this initial installation will have long passed." The room fell silent. Karen's face began to turn a mottled shade of red and white. Henderson looked utterly defeated. They had regulated what they could imagine. They never imagined an art defense. They never imagined a guy like Dante. Henderson tapped his pen weakly. "So, Mr. Alex, you are claiming this mosaic is a permanent artistic installation not covered by the current definition of pavers or exterior surfaces requiring an approved color palette?" "I am stating that with absolute confidence, sir," I replied, maintaining my innocent expression. "And you have documentation from your artist?" "In triplicate," Dante confirmed. Henderson slammed his hand on the table. A soft thud, not a triumphant one. "The board cannot enforce a C&D order based on a violation that is not explicitly defined in the bylaws. Unless the bylaws are changed, the installation stays. The victory was mine. The chairman immediately adjourned the meeting, desperate to escape. Karen stared daggers at me, her mask finally cracking to show pure, unadulterated, impotent hatred. I had won the technical, legal, and spectacularly tacky war. The immediate aftermath was sublime. I had a permanent, glorious, blindingly bright mosaic porch, and Karen was legally defeated. She couldn't force me to remove it, and the process of changing the bylaws was slow, agonizing, and required her to actually talk to the neighbors she had spent years alienating. Karen, unable to attack the structure, resorted to classic, absurd, passive-aggressive maneuvers. First, she installed a gigantic 4-foot-tall gnome garden on the edge of her lawn closest to my property line. It wasn't just gnomes. It was a full ceramic fairy village, complete with tiny birdhouses and a fountain that constantly dribbled water. The gnome garden, strategically placed, was clearly an attempt to obscure the view of my porch from her living room window. I responded by installing a small, perfectly legal spotlight that shone directly onto the gnome garden at night, illuminating their tiny ceramic faces in an eerie, theatrical glow. Point, Alex. Next, the phone calls. Whenever I was sitting on my mosaic porch, which was all the time, just to enjoy the victory, Karen would emerge with her cell phone, walk over to her hedge, and have loud, exaggeratedly frustrated conversations. "Yes, Brenda, I know. The noise. It's just relentless. And the glare. It's like living next to a funhouse mirror. I simply don't know how much longer I can maintain the standards of the neighborhood." I would just wave cheerily and sip my iced tea. The mosaic was the soundstage for her defeat. The house officially became an infamous local landmark. People started driving by slowly. They called it the Disco Porch, or the Angry Art House. I embraced it fully. I occasionally put out a small, tasteful, hand-painted sign near the sidewalk that read, "It used to be a rug." Total strangers, people I'd never seen before, would stop to chat. "Dude, I heard about this," one guy told me, leaning out of his truck. "My buddy, Officer Rodriguez, told me the whole story. You're a legend, man. You really fought the power." It was a difficult journey, I replied gravely, shining a reflective tile with my foot. But freedom often costs a fortune in glass mosaic. The neighbors who secretly hated the HOA tyranny started stopping by too, offering little nods of approval. The mosaic had become a symbol of anti-conformity, and I was its reluctant, sarcastic hero. I maintained a solid friendship with Dante, who was now fully invested in my mission of suburban chaos. He would stop by, sit on the porch, and admire his work. One afternoon, Dante was sipping a beer, the afternoon sun creating a beautiful, chaotic explosion of color around us. "So, Alex," he said, adjusting his spectacular mustache, "we conquered the horizontal plane. We established the primacy of artistic expression over aesthetic fascism. What's next?" I paused, looking at Karen's ridiculously illuminated gnome garden. "You know, Dante, the backyard fence is looking awfully beige, and Section 7DI is very clear about restricting paint colors, but it says absolutely nothing about structural additions." Dante's eyes lit up. "A solar-powered kinetic sculpture?" "No," I replied, a slow smile spreading across my face. "Something that moves, something that produces sound, something that changes color based on the wind speed, something that is visible from all adjacent properties and requires a custom foundation." Dante just laughed, a deep, rumbling sound. Let me sketch out the blueprints for the wind chime of vengeance, my friend. I look out at my porch now, years later. It's still blinding. It's still spectacular. It's still the most aggressively beautiful porch in the entire state of Ohio, maybe the entire Midwest. Karen is still my neighbor. She installed blackout curtains in her living room, a final, structural concession to my victory. I spent a small fortune and risked the collective sanity of my neighborhood over a rug. The story isn't about property value, which is probably terrible now. It's not even really about the mosaic. It's about the high cost of principle, the sheer joy of petty victory, and the simple truth that sometimes the only way to win an argument with a tyrant is to give them something so fundamentally, irreversibly, and dazzlingly wrong that their own rules can't touch it. I lost a rug, I gained a masterpiece, and I finally realized that the suburbs aren't a witness protection program. They're just a giant, shared canvas, and I decided to paint my small part of it in nuclear orange and iridescent safety vest grout. And honestly, it looks great, especially at sunrise.